I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into the launch party and saw my name tag. Just 2 words, printed in Comic Sans, crooked on cheap cardstock. Guest. Not lead systems architect. Not director of infrastructure. Just guest. A word that felt like a slap dressed up in bad font. 15 years of duct taping a product together with code, caffeine, and sheer brute force, and they reduced me to an outsider. The ballroom reeked of rented extravagance. Velvet ropes, spotlights that blinded more than they lit, a washed-up DJ from the early 2000s spinning tracks that no one under 40 recognized. Investors shuffled around with rented confidence, champagne in one hand and iPhones in the other, live streaming what they thought was history in the making. I stood near the sad shrimp cocktail table, balancing a flimsy plastic flute of warm champagne, watching the circus like it was a funeral with mood lighting. Our flagship product, the future of integrated logistics, at least according to the marketing deck, was about to be paraded out. The execs strutted like they were unveiling a cure for cancer instead of a half-broken system barely held together with the scripts in my head. And then, as if the stage were built just for his smirk, Bradley Cole appeared. Perfect hair, 2 white teeth, cologne that smelled like pine trees and subtle threats. Bradley took the mic like he was hosting the Oscars. He grinned, his voice booming through the sound system. "We couldn't have done it without all of you," he crooned, tossing corporate platitudes like confetti. People clapped. I clapped too, out of instinct, muscle memory, maybe just social pressure. And then his smile sharpened. "I also want to share one more update tonight. As we streamline operations, we've made the strategic decision to part ways with a longtime team member. Let's give a round of applause to Emily Carter for her many years of service." My ears rang. Did he just? Yes. He fired me on stage, into a microphone, like it was part of the entertainment schedule. The applause sputtered, scattered claps, a few gasps, an awkward cough from the mimosa bar. I didn't cry, didn't scream. I just smiled, the kind of smile you wear when your house is burning down and all you can do is sip sweet tea on the porch. Bradley's eyes flicked toward me, then away. I'd seen it coming. Missed meetings, cold shoulders, no invites to pre-launch briefings. My badge access had been glitching for 2 days. But still, publicly, in front of the very people I trained? It wasn't just a firing. It was a message. You're obsolete. We don't need you. I slipped the half-empty flute of champagne onto a tray some poor intern was juggling like a butler in a fever dream. Walked past the oversized company logo banner, the looping Vision 2030 slide. The LinkedIn photographer snapping shots of people who'd forget each other's names by next quarter. Nobody stopped me. Nobody knew how. The drive home was silent. No music, no podcasts, just the hum of my old Civic and the buzz of messages lighting up my phone. Are you okay? That was brutal. Coworkers too afraid to speak up in person but brave enough to text after the fact. Rage didn't hit like a lightning bolt. It settled slow, cold, glacial, behind my ribs like concrete. Not fiery anger, but a quiet calculation. Because here's the thing. What Bradley Cole didn't know, what none of them remembered, was the paper trail. The sloppy little time bomb buried in the company's archives. 3.5 years earlier, during a messy restructuring, legal had been drowning in backlog. Patent filings were delayed. Compliance deadlines loomed. Panic spread. They asked me, to file the provisional patents and back-end infrastructure under my name. Temporary IP custodian, they called it, just until their paperwork caught up. Weeks passed. Months. Nobody followed up. Nobody filed the transfer. And me? I assumed they had. That night, after Bradley's stunt, I searched my inbox. The chain was still there. Emails, signatures, timestamps, PDF attachments with my name as sole filer and owner of the system's patents, the architecture, the whole damn backbone. I closed my laptop slowly, not with a slam, but with the weight of sealing a tomb. I hadn't planned this, wasn't angling for leverage, but now? They thought they could rip out the engine and still drive the car. They didn't realize I was the engine. By the next morning, HR had already emailed my offboarding packet. Subject line, next steps for transition. No thank you, no phone call. Just the corporate boilerplate of budget realignment. My laptop access was revoked. My badge deactivated. Even the Pothos plant I'd kept alive for 6 years would be boxed and shipped without me. But I didn't panic. I didn't beg. I just sat at my kitchen table, sipping burnt coffee from my chipped mug, staring at the folder of receipts, emails, and legal documents piling on my desk. A lifeboat, piece by piece. Because when the ship is sinking, you don't scream. You find the exit. By day 2, my inbox was already a graveyard of polite silence. HR sent one more canned message reminding me to return my company badge, as if the revoked plastic in my drawer still had any power left. Facilities emailed that my personal items would be carefully boxed and shipped. No one asked if the framed photo of my dad might survive bubble wrap. Colleagues avoided me like I carried a contagious disease. The few who dared reached out through private channels. I'm so sorry, Emily. I didn't know they'd do it that way. I thought it was a joke until I saw your Slack icon go gray. Words typed in secret, never spoken out loud in the fluorescent corridors of the office. Bradley Cole, meanwhile, was basking in his 15 seconds of glory. By noon, the day after the launch party, his LinkedIn profile had a fresh headshot. Bright teeth, smug tilt of the chin, captioned with, "Proud to lead a leaner, sharper team into the next evolution of tech innovation." Sometimes, tough decisions pave the way for greatness. 200 likes. Dozens of comments from other middle management gargoyles clapping in unison. Tough calls make strong leaders. Trimming the fat is never easy, but always necessary. Fat, huh? That's what 15 years of keeping their fragile systems alive made me. Fat. I screenshotted his post, not because I needed proof, but because I knew one day he'd delete it. And I wanted to remember the exact moment he danced on what he thought was my grave. But the system... Oh, the system remembered me. Servers don't care about politics. Code doesn't recognize who's holding the microphone at a launch party. Machines only know who built them. And I had built them. That weekend, I watched from my own devices, old admin hooks I'd written long before the company mandated two-factor through proprietary apps. Not to sabotage, not to spy, just to watch. Within 12 hours of their first post-launch deployment, the logs were already coughing. Dead calls, unresolved DNS entries, API chains broken because no one had documented them, because I had. For years, I begged them to prioritize documentation, redundancy, version control. Bradley waved it off as invisible labor. Funny thing about invisible labor, when you fire the person doing it, the cracks show fast. By day 3, the cracks were fractures. UI elements crashing with 500 errors. Partner APIs rejecting payloads outright. Authentication tokens expiring without renewal. Because the refresh protocol lived inside a microservice only I had touched. A service tucked inside a private repo under my access tree, the same one they'd revoked without thinking. I wasn't touching the system. Not a single line of code. This wasn't sabotage. It was arrogance collapsing under its own weight. They assumed the glue would always be there. But I had been the glue, and they'd cut me loose. Day 6, the first desperate emails arrived. Hey, Emily, hope you're doing well. Quick question. Do you remember where the legacy sync script for the inventory API lives? Can't seem to find it. LOL. LOL. As if my memory of their undocumented chaos was some inside joke. Then came a Slack ping from Mark in engineering. The same Mark who hadn't made eye contact since the party. Hey, weird question. Do you remember if the image processing queue had a separate cron job, or if it was bundled with the pipeline, asking for traceability? Traceability is code for we're screwed, and nobody knows why. I didn't respond, not because I wanted to watch them burn, though part of me did, but because I wanted them to sit with the truth. Their system was never theirs. It had always been mine. I opened a blank document on my home laptop, titled it simply, License Terms, Draft 1. Not in anger, not in spite, with the calm detachment of someone filing an insurance claim on a house they knew would burn down, because the idiots inside had already lit the match. By Monday morning, the dam finally broke. Build after build failed. Each time, the same robotic slap across their screens. Access restricted. Owner override required. At first, they thought it was a permissions glitch, a bad token, some rookie typo. But when even the root admin credentials failed, when the CI/CD pipeline flat out refused to budge without one biometric key, someone finally asked the right question. Wait, who's listed as the primary owner? Silence. Keyboard clicks. A pause heavy enough to bend the air. And then the answer. Emily Carter. My name. Not hidden in a corner, not buried in fine print. Stamped at the root of the very product they'd fired me over. Some junior engineer piped up. Didn't Emily mention something years ago about being the IP custodian? I thought she was joking. Bradley wasn't in that meeting. He never came to meetings without cameras or catered coffee, so he waved it off. She's bluffing, doesn't matter, it's company property, just fix the pipeline. But legal didn't wave it off. Not after they pulled the old thread from the archives. Not after they saw the signatures, the provisional patents, the compliance forms. My name clear as day. Custodian, owner, and worst of all, the revocation clause. No transfer of ownership without the current custodian's explicit written consent. Their oversight. My leverage. Bradley had strutted across a stage with a mic to fire me. Now he was about to learn what happens when you mistake an architect for fat. By Wednesday morning, the silence inside the company was humming so loud I could almost hear it from my living room. The official press release announcing the product launch had been quietly pulled from the company's homepage. Investor blogs whispered about technical delays. Then came the email. Polite, surgical, too careful. Subject line. Clarification on procedural matters. Dear Ms. Carter, we hope you're doing well. We're reaching out regarding some historical filing logistics tied to the current product pipeline. Nothing urgent, just hoping to clarify a few inconsistencies in our records. Would you be open to a brief conversation? Elizabeth Chen, Corporate Counsel. Translation. We stepped on a rake and need you to stop us from bleeding out. 2 hours later, another message popped up. This one wasn't polished at all. From Bradley Cole. Subject. Hey, buddy. Hey, Emily. Crazy week, huh? Hope you're doing good. I think legal might loop you into some convo about old docs. Just wanted to say no hard feelings on my end. Maybe grab coffee and talk it out? No pressure. Talk it out. This from the man who'd fired me into a microphone between hors d'oeuvres and champagne. I didn't answer Bradley. I wrote back to Elizabeth. Happy to connect. Thursday morning works. When Thursday came, I dressed deliberately. Black blazer. Soft gray blouse. Matte lipstick. The same heels I'd worn years ago when I first pitched the architecture that carried their fragile empire. I wasn't there as an employee. I was there as the storm they didn't see coming. Walking into the lobby, I could feel the eyes. Receptionists staring like they'd seen a ghost who remembered their Wi-Fi password. I signed in without a word. Elizabeth met me at the elevator. Sharp suit, polite smile, eyes ringed with fatigue from too many sleepless nights. Conference room 6B. Long mahogany table, overpriced coffee steaming in the corner. I sat down with nothing but a blank notebook. Didn't need documents. My presence was document enough. At 9:42, the door swung open. Bradley swaggered in, 10 minutes late, as usual. Tan loafers, untucked shirt beneath a blazer he thought made him look casual and in control. He smiled like we were college buddies catching up. "Sorry I'm late. Hope we're not making this a bigger deal than it is." Nobody laughed. Elizabeth slid a manila folder across the table like it was a loaded weapon. "We'd like to review documentation related to the provisional IP filings from 2020 and 2021. Bradley leaned forward, expecting some harmless paperwork. His smirk slowed by page 3. By page 4, it died completely. Elizabeth tapped with her pen. "Per the revocation clause, ownership transfer requires explicit written consent from the custodian. We found no such transfer." Bradley turned to me, pale now. "This is a joke, right?" I didn't blink, didn't smirk. Silence was sharper than any words. The HVAC groaned overhead. A half-full carafe of coffee steamed into nothing. Elizabeth spoke again, calm but merciless. "Without Ms. Carter's consent, the company cannot legally deploy or operate the product. Doing so would constitute infringement." Bradley's shoulders sagged like a man suddenly aware gravity applied to him too. "But the whole product, it's built on this." "You're saying the launch would be illegal?" Elizabeth nodded once. "Correct." For the first time in his career, Bradley Cole shut his mouth. I folded my hands on the table, letting the silence hang, letting him sit with the reality. He'd fired the one person holding the deed to the empire. He'd kicked out the support beam, and now the roof was collapsing on his head. Elizabeth cleared her throat softly. "Emily, we'd like to discuss potential licensing terms. We can send over a draft proposal by end of day." I nodded once. Nothing more. My leverage didn't need theatrics. The meeting ended with Bradley staring at the folder like it might rewrite itself if he glared long enough. Elizabeth escorted me back to the lobby. She didn't say it, but I could see it in her eyes, respect edged with exhaustion. She knew exactly who was holding the cards now. That night, the first offer arrived. Subject line, "Excited to collaborate again." They offered me my old job back. Same title, same salary, back pay, a re-engagement bonus of $15,000 tossed in like sprinkles on a burnt cake. I replied with 3 words, "No, thank you." 12 hours later, the second offer came. A 6-month consulting contract, $200 an hour. Flexible terms. Nervous wording that circled the truth without touching it. They had no leverage. I sipped my morning coffee, read the email twice, then typed my counter. Exclusive, non-transferable license. 5 years. No derivative work without my approval. 7 figures paid up front. Retainer optional. Access contingent on wire confirmation. No back doors, no transition help. And then I hit send. No pleasantries, no emojis, just terms. My terms. By Friday, the panic wasn't just in their inboxes. It was leaking out into the open. Investor forums started buzzing with questions about postponed demos. The homepage that once bragged, "Launching this week," now showed nothing but a generic, "Stay tuned" banner. Momentum is currency in the startup world, and they were bleeding it by the hour. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned itself out in the first 48 hours after that party. What I felt now was colder, steadier. Like watching a chess match I already knew the outcome of. By noon, whispers trickled into my phone from allies who still worked inside. Bradley had been cut out of the investor deck. His access to certain folders revoked. One text said, "He's on sabbatical. Nobody's seen him since Wednesday." Another message forwarded me the dry HR memo. "Effective immediately, VP of Product Bradley Cole will be transitioning out of his role." Interim oversight will be provided by the CTO. No thank you, no farewell, no tribute to his visionary leadership. Just a footnote between a reminder about password resets and an HR webinar. The same man who fired me on stage into a microphone had been erased with less ceremony than an intern's departure. And me? I didn't even bother saving the memo. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was paperwork. Quiet, surgical justice. When legal finally called, Elizabeth's voice was flat with exhaustion. "We're ready to move forward on your proposal, Emily. I'll send the final licensing draft shortly." I leaned back in my chair, sun cutting across my desk. "Great. I'll review it this weekend." She hesitated. "You're not in a hurry?" "No. I'm not the one who needs this to ship." Silence on her end. She didn't have to answer. She knew I was right. The following week, I walked back into the same glass-walled conference room I'd once entered as an employee. Only this time, the placard in front of me didn't read Director of Systems. It read, Emily Carter, Principal, Carter Systems Advisory, Vendor, not staff. And this time, I held the leverage. Elizabeth opened the meeting with the dry cadence of legalese, but her tone carried weight. "As of this agreement, Ms. Carter is the sole license holder of the intellectual property stack underlying the company's logistics platform." The boardroom was quieter than I remembered. Bradley's old seat was empty. Rumor said he was exploring new opportunities outside the company. Translation: shoved out the side door with a forced smile in his farewell Slack post. I clicked the remote. The projector lit up behind me with a new deck. My deck. Platform roadmap. Revised deployment timeline. My logo sat neatly in the corner. My terms in the footer. I walked them through each slide with calm precision. New access protocols, quarterly audits, licensing checkpoints only I could authorize. The CTO nodded grimly. The head of partnerships asked tentative questions, which I answered with rehearsed ease. I wasn't there to beg. I was there to dictate. One older board member, a man I'd only ever seen during IPO gossip, lifted his glass halfway through. "To keeping the smart ones happy next time." Nervous chuckles rippled around the table. No one wanted to be next in the crosshairs of their own negligence. When the vote passed unanimously to ratify the licensing deal, the room emptied quickly. Executives filed out with their heads low, murmuring thanks, like patients thanking a surgeon who saved them from bleeding out on the table. As I packed up my laptop, the CTO lingered. A man who once couldn't remember my name at company mixers now looked at me with something like awe. "You really built all of that yourself?" I met his eyes. "No, I built it for them, and then they built a noose with it." He flinched, nodded, and left. I walked slowly toward the elevator, not rushed, not nervous. Nobody dared to stop me or question if I belonged there. In the glass reflection of the lobby, I looked taller. Maybe I was, or maybe it was just the weight finally gone. Behind me, the boardroom door clicked shut like the closing of a book. And in the quiet hum of the elevator ride down, I repeated it to myself. Certain, calm, final. They fired me to save 200 grand. Now it cost them 7 figures to buy it back. The ink dried faster than I expected. By the end of that week, Elizabeth sent over the final licensing draft. Clean, sharp, airtight. The numbers stared at me from the PDF header like a secret only I was meant to see. 7 figures, wired up front. I didn't smile, didn't cry, just signed with the steady hand of someone who'd already lived the moment a dozen times in her head. A neat, digital signature sealed what Bradley Cole had thrown away under champagne lights. The money hit my account 2 days later. Not in installments, not staggered across milestones. A lump sum so heavy it made my online banking app stutter before the digits loaded. For the first time in 15 years, I didn't have to think about rent, or credit card balances, or whether I could afford to replace my 12-year-old Honda. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks, it felt like silence. But the company's silence wasn't voluntary. It was the kind that comes when you're scrambling underwater. Investor briefings turned into damage control sessions. Rumors swirled that 2 board members threatened to walk if the product wasn't stabilized under my license. Partners demanded clarity. Clients whispered about pulling out. And in every single conversation, my name hovered like smoke. Not Bradley's, not the CTO's. Mine. I became a ghost they couldn't exorcise. Every quarterly roadmap, every deployment cycle, every contract clause that required my explicit approval. My email signature alone could stall or greenlight millions of dollars. I hadn't sabotaged them. I hadn't stolen anything. I had simply done what they'd asked me to do years ago. Hold their crown jewels while they drowned in their own paperwork. They forgot. I remembered. And Bradley Cole? He was nowhere. The last whisper I heard was that he'd fled to Florida, consulting for a minor e-commerce startup that barely kept the lights on. Some said he was pitching himself as a visionary at angel investor dinners, avoiding any mention of why he'd left his last role. Others swore he was sulking in a rented condo, replaying the launch party in his head, wondering how it had all unraveled so fast. I didn't care enough to check. What mattered was the system, the one I built, the one they'd underestimated. Under the New Deal, I established protocols that made it impossible for anyone to repeat Bradley's mistake. Layered checkpoints, quarterly audits only I could approve, derivative work barred without my consent. They were shackled to me, and they knew it. Funny thing about power? It doesn't roar. It whispers. It sits at the bottom of a contract, in clauses no one reads until it's too late. I started Carter Systems Advisory out of a 1-bedroom apartment with a second-hand IKEA desk. The logo was simple, the website bare bones. Yet within a month, 3 other companies reached out quietly. Startups who'd watched the fiasco unfold from a distance and realized they needed someone like me before they made the same mistake. I didn't even pitch. The offers arrived with name your terms. For years, I'd been the invisible net, the fail-safe who caught the system before it collapsed. Now, invisibility was gone. My name sat on contracts, on IP filings, on licensing agreements that defined whether multi-million-dollar launches lived or died. It wasn't fame. It wasn't revenge. It was something cleaner, recognition carved out of silence. One night, weeks after the dust settled, I found myself back at the same bar near the office where we used to gather after product launches. It was empty, save for a bartender wiping down pint glasses. I ordered bourbon. Neat. Staring into the amber glass, I thought about the party, about the shrill laughter under spotlights, the fake applause, the way Bradley's voice had boomed through the speakers as he cut me loose in front of everyone. I tried to imagine what he felt in that conference room weeks later, when Elizabeth slid the manila folder across the table, when he realized the empire he thought he controlled had my name on its foundation. Maybe he felt betrayed. Maybe he felt stupid. Maybe he just felt the crushing weight of silence. Either way, it wasn't my burden anymore. I raised the glass, not in a toast, but in a quiet acknowledgement. To every hour I'd poured into code no one else wanted to understand. To every invisible line of logic that made me indispensable. To the mistake they made when they confused loyalty with weakness. They'd fired me to save $200,000. They paid 7 figures to crawl back. That was my closure. Running Carter Systems Advisory didn't feel like running a company at first. It felt like cleaning up after a storm. My first clients came not because of slick marketing or flashy pitches, but because they'd seen the wreckage at my old firm and wanted insurance. They wanted me. I set up shop in my apartment with 2 monitors balanced on a thrift store desk and a cat weaving between my feet. No glass tower, no mahogany boardroom, just me, a laptop, and a reputation. The contracts arrived quietly, slipped into my inbox like coded pleas for stability. One startup wrote, "We're about to file patents on a logistics platform. We don't want a coal situation. Can you review our filings?" Another said, "We need redundancy protocols before launch. We can pay whatever you ask." Whatever I asked. That phrase stuck. For 15 years, I'd heard the opposite. "We can't budget for that. Can you do it faster? We'll fix it in post." Now, suddenly, I was the line item no one dared cut. I didn't exploit them. I charged fair, even generous rates. But I made one thing non-negotiable: ownership clarity. Every clause watertight. Every IP filing airtight. No shortcuts. If they wanted my expertise, they had to respect the architecture, the documentation, the legal backbone. Because I knew what happened when they didn't. And meanwhile, back at my old company, the ghost of my absence lingered. I didn't need insiders to tell me. I could see it in the market. Their launch limped forward months late, strangled by audits and checkpoints they couldn't bypass without my signature. Investors treated them like a patient on life support. Still breathing, but not to be trusted with heavy lifting. Occasionally, my phone buzzed with messages from old colleagues, some apologetic, some curious, some flat-out bitter. "Emily, I can't believe you pulled that off. You left us to drown. Wish I'd listened when you said documentation mattered." I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, just because those conversations belonged to another life. One evening, as I reviewed a licensing draft for a new client, a LinkedIn notification popped up. Against my better judgment, I clicked. Bradley Cole. His profile looked diminished. Gone were the glossy photo shoots, the smug captions about innovation. Now, a grainy headshot in poor lighting. Title: Independent Consultant. Location: Orlando, Florida. No company name. No active projects listed. His last post had 3 likes. One from his aunt. I stared at it longer than I should have. Not with pity, not with joy. Just a kind of clinical detachment. Here was the man who had once held a microphone and my career in his hand, reduced to digital static. I closed the tab. Because Bradley Cole wasn't the story anymore. The story was every engineer out there quietly duct-taping systems together while execs gave speeches. The invisible laborers who carried companies on their backs, only to be called fat when budgets got tight. I started writing about it, short essays on Medium, posts on LinkedIn, speaking out in webinars, not rants, but measured breakdowns. The cost of neglecting documentation, the risks of sloppy IP filing, the hidden backbone of invisible work. My following grew. Not viral, not influencer big, but steady. The kind of audience that mattered. Engineers, architects, the quiet ones in hoodies who recognized themselves in my words. And with each contract I signed, each clause I reinforced, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I'd been the ghost in the machine, the net under the tightrope. Now, I was the architect of my own scaffolding. One night, a client invited me to speak at a small conference in Chicago. I almost declined. I'd never liked stages, never liked the spotlight. But then I remembered the launch party, the microphone, the applause that turned into silence when Bradley fired me in public. So I said yes. The room wasn't huge. Maybe 100 people, fluorescent lights, a cheap projector buzzing. But as I walked on stage, heels clicking against the linoleum, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging. I clicked the first slide. Invisible labor, visible consequences. And for 45 minutes, I told my story. Not about revenge, not about Bradley Cole, but about architecture, ownership, and the cost of pretending glue is optional. When I finished, the room was quiet. Not stunned, not awkward, but thoughtful. Then the applause came, warm and real, not forced like the champagne claps at that cursed party. Afterward, a young woman in a wrinkled hoodie approached me. "I'm an engineer. They never take my documentation seriously. Hearing you, it makes me think maybe I'm not crazy." I smiled. "You're not. They just don't understand yet. But someday, they'll wish they had." She grinned, relief washing over her face. That moment mattered more than any licensing fee, because for the first time, I wasn't just holding a company hostage with my name on a patent. I was holding the line for people like her. For every invisible engineer who deserved to be seen. Months passed. Carter Systems Advisory grew quietly. Not with billboards or flashy investors, but with reputation. One client turned into 3. 3 turned into 10. I hired a junior engineer, then a paralegal, then rented an office space with real windows instead of my apartment wall. The money was good, better than good, but that wasn't the real victory. The real victory was watching companies change their behavior. They no longer treated documentation like a chore. They no longer filed patents like afterthoughts, because they'd heard the story of what happened when they did. My story. Every so often, I'd get a new message from Elizabeth Chen. Updates about renewals, audit schedules, occasional notes of gratitude wrapped in legal formality. Once she wrote, "For what it's worth, you saved them from themselves." I didn't reply. Some truths don't need acknowledgement. Bradley Cole disappeared into the noise. Last I heard, he'd taken a contract with a minor logistics outfit in Tampa, the kind that will never sniff venture capital, much less an IPO. His name floated across LinkedIn occasionally, attached to half-hearted pitches about resilience and innovation. Nobody listened. He wasn't my ghost anymore. Just another cautionary tale, a footnote in someone else's PowerPoint. One Friday evening, I walked past the old office building. Same glass facade, same revolving doors spitting out tired employees clutching laptops like life preservers. For a moment, I thought about stepping inside, flashing my badge out of old habit. But then I remembered, I didn't belong to that building anymore. It belonged, in part, to me. My name sat at the bottom of their licensing contracts like a watermark. I stood across the street, watching the sunset reflect off the glass, and whispered to myself, "You thought you buried me, but I was the foundation all along." The city bustled around me, horns blaring, people rushing, neon signs flickering on. And for the first time in years, I felt weightless. Because closure doesn't always come with revenge or applause. Sometimes, closure is a contract signed on your terms. Sometimes, it's knowing the people who underestimated you can't move an inch without your signature. Sometimes, it's silence. That night, I poured a glass of bourbon in my apartment, the same chipped mug sitting quietly beside it. My cat curled on the desk as I opened a fresh document. Title: The Cost of Firing Invisible Labor. Not a threat, not a vendetta, just the truth, written plain, for whoever needed to hear it next. I typed the first line slowly, deliberately. They fired me to save $200,000. It cost them 7 figures to forget it. And then I smiled, closed my eyes, and let the city hum outside my window. The end.